Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys. In today's topic, we are going to dive into 10 reasons people are moving to Mexico. Now, I don't know if you can see out my window there, but that is Mexico City. I am based in Mexico City. I've been here for about a year, just moved into a new place where I'm going to be doing some of my creative endeavors for this chapter of my channel and my life. However, I have a unique perspective because I actually lived in Mexico before. I studied down here abroad. I was here for 2 years, and then I stayed and worked for 2 years after the fact. And that was, oh God, going on 15 years ago. So I've been able to see Mexico evolve and grow as the modern world starts becoming more and more part of contemporary Mexican society. So that being said, guys, I want to thank you all for stopping by. Hopefully this is a good stream. If you have any questions, save it for the end. And if you haven't done so already, if you're new to the channel, welcome. I cover all sorts of topics. Primarily, it started off as a dating type channel. I'll still cover a lot of those topics. However, I'm going to slowly start to pivot it more into the location independence type topics, minimalist mindset stuff, specific questions to living in Mexico. And then, of course, there'll be plenty of dating, fitness, and those types of topics as well. So in general, it's just about creating a lifestyle. My motto is to create lives worth living and loving. And I believe that is what we are all put on this earth to do, is to live lives worth living and loving, to be able to give back to those whom live our lives with us and whom we love. So that being said, I'll dive on into the topic. I put together a small presentation, so we will cruise through those, and then any questions, we'll be ready to roll at the end. So 10 reasons to move to Mexico. And if there's anything I missed, guys, leave it in the comments, or anything you might disagree with. But this is all pretty standard stuff. It's stuff people know. So all right, guys, you'll notice that my background all of a sudden shifted, and that is because it is now much later. I got off the live stream and realized that my microphone and video had cut out for the first slide, so I'll insert that now. So number one, cost. Obviously, cost is a big factor for people coming to Mexico. Generally, you can achieve a higher standard of living for about the same monthly budget in the US. That really all depends. When I did my research, it said 50 to 65% is what people typically spend as compared to the United States if you're American and coming from the US. However, I've found that for me, my income's actually gone up because I live a much more peaceful, kind of relaxed lifestyle, and I have a lot more free time for my creative endeavors. So my budget or my income has actually gone up. And my budget percentage wise, like rent alone, I was paying 50% of total take home pay in California. And that's just for like average place. Here in Mexico, it's like 5-10%, sometimes as high as 20% if my income takes a little dip for a specific month. But in general, you're gonna be able to save quite a bit of money here. Now, that depends on the way you live. So typically my budget, it's $2,000 a month. My rent is $1,000 a month. It's for a 2-bedroom high rise in one of the nicest neighborhoods in one of the most expensive cities in the country and the Spanish speaking world. So you can obviously get a lot lower if you want to. However, my budget can also go up a lot more if I'm traveling every weekend, if I'm going out every weekend doing bottle service. If I take a trip to the US, then that budget will go up. But generally in any 30-day given period in Mexico, my budget's actually pretty low. So this month I've been kind of in monk mode. I'll end up paying my rent. Internet's less than $50 for 500 megabytes down, and I get my food delivered to me. It's $200 a month for 3 meals a day, and then whatever additional I decide to spend if I go out or whatnot. But in general, it's pretty cheap to live here. They also have affordable housing, so those looking to retire or possibly build at some point, you don't get all this crazy HOA fees. Like the place I live, it has an HOA. I think it's like $100 a month or so, but we have pretty high quality security. We have all the good amenities. It feels like a first world living situation. So for me, I have no problem paying that. If you want to build new property, the regulations are low, although you will deal with government bureaucracy. However, if you learn Spanish, come down here, create relationships, or hell, if you have an issue, reach out to me and I'll put you in contact with someone that can help you out with that type of stuff. I have pretty solid networks down here. Then they can help you skirt around those types of potential obstacles. Let's just say that. I'll say it in a nice way. Just in general, the way things work here, that yes, they have a legal system. There are laws in place, but laws are merely a suggestion. So Consider it, for example, in the US, like there's red light, green light, and yellow light. So laws in the US are like red light. Like if you cross this line, we will send you to jail. Mexico's kind of like, hey, like, bro, you should have slowed down, but obviously you're not a terrible person, you're not a criminal, you're not a piece of crap. So you're all right. Like maybe just don't do it again. So that's the way I kind of equate the laws here. Property taxes, they're pretty much non-existent. They're super, super cheap compared to the US from what I've heard from everyone I've spoken to. I haven't purchased anything here yet, so I can't comment on that. But once I get to that point, I'll definitely walk you through the process as I do it myself. Another big thing cost-wise is that healthcare here is actually quite high quality. It's modern healthcare. Yeah, maybe the building won't be as nice, but the machinery, the technicians, and the technology, it's all on par with any major developed countries. In fact, I know any doctor, medical professional I've seen here, they're trained in the US or Europe or Japan or wherever the technology comes from to make sure that they're proficient on any of those systems. And a lot of Mexican doctors are actually educated in the US, and surprisingly, even more so, a lot of US doctors are educated in Mexico. So the university I went to is a private school in Guadalajara. They had an international medical center there where they trained a lot of US and Canadian doctors. And I've actually had doctors in the US like, oh, I went to that school. So you may even know someone if you're in the US or Canada in the medical profession that actually studied in Mexico. You'll have to do your research if you want to study down here, but there's a lot of degree programs and departments that are on par with US and Canada, and those credits will transfer right back for you. I got 2 undergraduate degrees. I did most of my studies in Mexico, transferred all those credits back to the US. And then there's a couple things to get my degrees issued in the United States to where I had to go back and take a couple classes, but it was like an extra semester. It wasn't much. So I did all my studies in Mexico, but I graduated with US degrees. And the big thing with the healthcare here too is it's kind of a hybrid system. They do have socialized healthcare. However, as with any country that has socialized healthcare, it's essentially the government dictating your degree of medical care, and a lot of people don't like that. In here, it's kind of the same thing. They call it IMSS, is their socialized medicine in Mexico. It's kind of a joke. People are kind of like, oh, just go to IMSS. And you're like, oh, ha, 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 ha. Yeah, really funny. Like everyone jokes about it. But if you need it, it is there. Most people, they go to private doctors and then you just pay for a consultation. They're not legalized drug dealers, so they don't try to push a bunch of stuff on you don't need. They actually focus on health rather than treating sickness, which is a big thing for me when I put my trust in any medical professional. Culturally, they're not going to try to get you addicted to all sorts of narcotics so they can get a payday on the back end of that equation. They actually get into it because they want to help people be healthy. So you'll notice that immediately in Mexico, the level of care is usually higher. Bedside manner is a lot better. And then the technology and the procedures and whatnot are on par for a fraction of the cost. So Mexico has a huge international medical tourism industry. Even if you're in like the southernmost US states, hell, I mean, you can fly to San Diego on a cheap Spirit flight, cross to Tijuana, and most of the doctors speak perfect English. They've been trained in the US if they're not American themselves. And a lot of them even have offices in California for consultations. And then you come to Mexico for the medical procedure because they just don't have all the bureaucracy and insurance crap in place like the US does. It's largely a scam in the US, but I'll do that on a different video on this channel. And then for any of these cost of living breakdowns, this website livingcost.org has some pretty cool infographics here. So the example they gave budget-wise in Mexico City, this seems about on par. My budget's a lot higher because I wanted to live US quality of life in Mexico, but my budget's still, it's about 20% on average of what I was paying in San Diego when I lived there. So this is probably about right. Total with rent, $971. That's if you get, maybe a more humble place in a neighborhood that it's still a nice neighborhood, but like not a upper class type neighborhood. Utilities are almost nothing here. Food, that depends. If you go out all the time, that number can get up there really high. Even more so if you drink and go to like high class, like 4 or 5 star establishments, they're on par with any major global city. But if you just go to like your neighborhood, like local mom and pop shops and diners, and you stay local, then your food is, I spend a couple $100 a month. It's probably cheaper than what I was spending in college when I was a broke college kid. Transportation, that varies largely. Mexico City, where I'm at, it's not necessarily the most drivable city. At this time at night, yes, it is. But usually people, unless you have to, you stay away from the car. Where I live, everything is accessible. I'm adjacent to all the good neighborhoods, all the trendy neighborhoods. So either on foot or by bike, I can get anywhere in less than 20 minutes. If I'm going further, I'll take an Uber. It's usually It's usually 10, maybe $15 max to go from one side of town to the other. It depends on demand. If it's raining, that will make the price go up. But transportation wise, I spend like $15 a month. I don't really go too far outside of the neighborhood unless I'm traveling somewhere longer distance. Monthly salary after tax, that is Mexican salaries. So there's a lot of people in the expat forums are like, oh, hey man, I'm in Mexico now. Like, what's a good Mexican company to work for? I was like, well, no, that's fantastic. There's plenty of good ones to work for, but you're going to earn your money in pesos. So what you want to do to get ahead is you want to earn your money in dollars or euros or whatever, and then pay in pesos is the rule. And when I lived in Guadalajara, I worked there for a bit too. I was being paid in pesos, and it is a lot harder to be paid in pesos and pay in pesos. You want to be paid in dollars or euros or another strong currency, and then pay in pesos. Quality of life. This is compared to other cities in Mexico. The quality of life is really high here. To be honest, I don't feel any different than I'm in the U.S. Most areas I've lived in the U.S. has a high Spanish-speaking population, so even walking out and about, it's no different. To be honest, Mexico's a little cleaner than the United States now. Not as much graffiti, not as much. There's still a littering culture. In the nicer neighborhoods, they don't litter as much, but if you get outside of there, yeah, they will. But they usually generally take pride in their culture and their heritage, so they try to preserve these things, which is really nice. That's something, unfortunately, I cannot say for the United States anymore. And then population-wise, according to this estimate, and again, this is just an example of an infographic. You can go to this website, livingcost.org, for more for other Mexican cities. But the population here, this graphic says 8.92 million. I've read estimates as far as 30 to 40 million, depending upon how you do it. Are you taking just the federal district, which used to be called Distrito Federal, DF? Some people still call it that. It's been Ciudad de Mexico for a while. Which is the larger city. You can go off of metropolitan estimates, or once you get outside of Mexico City, like I'm kind of on it's got weird border maps. I'm kind of on a border now, like a couple blocks up the road. I'm technically in Mexico State, but if you fly over the valley, like it's still just this giant population. So estimates are like 30 to 40 million people or so, last time I checked. So lifestyle, things move just a little bit slower in Mexico, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to be a bit patient. That is compared to the corporate rat race in the U.S., which is something I definitely fell into. You don't want to get stuck in that too long, because it really starts to kind of just wither away at you, and you don't want to live a life like that. It's not a life well lived. At least that was my mindset when I finally pulled the plug and decided to come back to Mexico. And there are a lot of holidays and priority placed on social groups, mainly interpersonal relationships. And you'll notice too, when you come down here, there's large extended families. Usually Sundays are pretty quiet because everyone's off doing something with their families. I get invites a lot, but I usually spend my Sundays just to kind of relax and catch up on work and prepare myself for the week. So it depends on how you want to structure your lifestyle, but you can definitely structure any sort of lifestyle any way you want in this country. All right, number 3, people. So surprisingly, whenever people ask, what's the happiest place on earth? And you see professional athletes like, oh, Disneyland, Disneyland. Well, it's actually Mexico. Mexico is consistently ranked as one of the happiest places on earth year over year since like 2012 or whenever they started doing those studies. One thing you'll notice, and it depends on where you're at, but I'm from the U.S., so in most U.S. cities, it seems like people are always kind of tense. They're always kind of have pent up anger for whatever reason. They have an agenda, which is really weird. Whereas in Mexico, if you hang out in the wrong areas or with the wrong people, yes, you still could come into that. But in general, just strangers, people are very pleasant when you speak to them. They smile, they're happy. They seem like they're fulfilled in their life. And another thing is that they're actually alive. They have expressions. They are living the human experience. And these are things in any conversation you have with anyone for any reason. They're usually just happy-go-lucky people, which I really appreciate. Whenever I go back to the U.S., the minute I get off the plane, oh, you can feel that tension. You're just like, oh, no, yeah, everyone here is just kind of a drone walking through society. That being said, the people are super friendly, so you'll always have plenty of invitations to social gatherings. They do like to party a lot, so when you're trying to be serious, I have to battle with that sometimes. I've been in a bit of monk mode these last few weeks, but you will always have invitations to go out and party. There's always something being celebrated for some reason. And in terms of people, actually, this is a question that's come up a lot when I was doing my research. It looks like a lot of people ask this. So as far as like racial diversity here, so Mexico doesn't really have the woke culture like the U.S. has. They're trying to push it. Here, they're using the feminists as their useful idiots to deface statues and destroy society and stuff like that. In the U.S., they try to pick at that racial scar or scab and let it bleed out to unravel the fabric of society. It's actually quite disgusting, really. Once you remove yourself from that situation, you say, "Oh, okay, they're pitting people against each other for nefarious means. I'm glad I'm not a part of that." Not to say Mexico doesn't have that too. They have a notoriously corrupt government, but as an outsider, or when you come in and live on a resident class visas, if you're not working for Mexican companies or Mexican government, then you really don't have to worry about that. You can be a 100% digital nomad. The visas are very favorable to that. I should have put in the cost that actually, if you derive a foreign-based income, then the Mexican government, or they call it La Hacienda, or SAT is the abbreviation in Spanish. They don't charge you any sort of income taxes, so you save quite a bit of money there too. Um, in terms of racial diversity, a lot of people don't know this. I actually wrote my thesis on this topic like more than a decade ago, 12 years ago. In terms of the what used to be Spanish racial caste system in Mexico. So when I lived down here the first time around, I had two black roommates. We did notice obvious discrimination when I worked down here. One of my buddies was a black guy, and we'd go on sales calls or whatever. And most of the time, we learned very quickly that we'd just leave him in the car. Someone like me. They say, I have Spanish speakers tell me all the time when I was getting my Mexican residency, like, "Oh, you'll get it really easy. You have the right profile." So that's kind of double speak in terms of I look like on this caste list as far as the hierarchy of races that used to be in Mexico. I believe they ended it in 1906. That the right profile means that you're higher on this caste system. The reason I mention this is not to scare anyone off. It's just to let you know that in the cities it largely doesn't exist anymore. I've had two black buddies visit within the last 30 days, and I told them the same thing, like, "Hey, you might meet different attitudes, but mostly it's people just being curious." And I think they've corroborated that they haven't experienced like any blatant outright discrimination like my buddies did 15 years ago. But as we know now, the world's much more well connected. When I lived here 15 years ago, I believe the iPhone first generation came out in 2007. Well, they didn't get it down here until years later. And then as far as any sort of apps or modern technology, there's still a bit of a lag between the US and down here, although it's certainly accessible, anything you need. Technology wise. So I believe that's why the attitudes are shifting. And then also, I live in a major international city. So people here, especially in Mexico City, they're familiar with foreigners because it's just such a global city that people are constantly coming in and out. So that might be a consideration. If you go to other more conservative traditional cities, or more unincorporated uh, areas, which really means areas that were never truly conquered by the Spanish, if you know that history. But generally, it's just curiosity. And I get that sometimes too. People make comments to me all the time about like my different physical features or about the way I talk. And it's just really, they're just curious in terms of the differences between people, is what I chalk it up to. In general, I've never had any negative experiences. Yes, I've witnessed open discrimination against other people, but it's never violent. It's never anything like that. It's usually more just kind of asking stupid questions, and I'm sure everyone's been asked a stupid question a time or two in their lives. Weather. So Mexico has very, very diverse climate based on the region of the country you go to. It's actually a very diverse country from a geographic and kind of topical or topographical standpoint. So I'm in Mexico City. We're about a mile and a half above sea level. So here, looking out my window, it's been raining every night for like the last month or so. But it looks like, if you look at this little graphic here in the right hand corner, that we kind of fallen at the tail end of the rainy season here. It's actually been really hot during the days, and then at night it gets cold. But we've had some awesome lightning storms right outside my window, so I definitely appreciate that. Whereas if you go more to northern Mexico, well, you're in the desert, so it's going to get hot. Imagine more like Arizona or like southern New Mexico. Well, it's pretty much the same region, West Texas type areas. When you go down into the south, you'll get more like a jungle type climate. A lot of movies in the 80s were filmed in the state of Chiapas, Yucatan Peninsula, the state of Guerrero, so Oaxaca. So any of those states, you're going to get more into like kind of more jungle type territory. Pacific coast, I think it's pretty temperate. It's It's pretty nice. It can get humid as you get more to the coast, and then obviously as you go up higher in elevation, it'll get cooler. The way I describe where I'm at in Mexico City, and when I lived in Guadalajara before, it's kind of the same. It's like Seattle in summertime, year round. So Mexico City does get a bit cold in the winter. We're high up in elevation. It's cloudy now, so you can't see the mountains in the background, but we will get some snow here. But I don't really ever have to worry about that. It's kind of like when I lived in California. If it's hot, you open the windows and you turn on fans, and then if it's cold, you close the windows and maybe a space heater next to your sleeping space, and you'll be fine. At least where I'm at. Baja California, it could be pretty barren in some places when you get up like Tijuana area, closer to San Diego. Well, it's the same climate as Southern California, but in general, the overarching theme is that the climates they're pretty nice. They're especially compared to like if you're coming from the U.S. or Canada. I always tell people that there are people here. They're like, well, why have you only lived in places like San Diego or southern U.S. states? Like, well, the U.S. climate sucks. Like the weather in the U.S. is usually pretty terrible most of the year. In Canada, oh God, I couldn't even consider living up there. It's so cold. But really, if you want to get really specific, there's a climate type available for every preference. And just the scenery in general is just absolutely stunning and breathtaking. Let's head to the next one. Culture. So as I mentioned before, they celebrate just about everything, which is good because that's a sign to me that they have a general zest or vibrancy in life, which a lot of people don't understand that word vibrant literally just comes from Latin or like vibe. It's like the frequency and the ability to be alive. And one thing I notice, and this is a requirement now, even if I were to leave Mexico someday, that in my travels through Latin America, that the less graffiti and the more giant murals you see, or the more people have an appreciation for the arts, music, and general culture, then usually the more alive the people are. Unfortunately, we are seeing in the US, you guys probably know, like with the exception of Top Gun this last summer, that most Hollywood movies are crap. They're complete flops, or they're half-ass attempted remakes at storylines from the past, and they just inject all this woke nonsense and political shit into it. And no one really cares for the arts anymore in the US. In fact, it's almost cool to go against our rich culture. And I say our because I'm American by nationality. Whereas here in Mexico, I mean, people try that. Like I said, they use the feminists down here as the useful idiots for the left. But Mexicans in general, they're not having that. They have beautiful, beautiful 500-year-old architecture, 500 plus years from the Spanish Conquista. You have pre-Hispanic ruins that are kept in very, very good condition, and there's an appreciation for their culture and their shared history, which unfortunately you don't find in a lot of the Western nations anymore. But it is so important to be a happy, healthy person in life. And again, people have a zest for life. They have a contagious, happy, positive energy that they want to share with others. So it's just a great way to live in general. Safety. So this is a question that comes up a lot. So yes, I'm sure you've watched Narcos, or I'm sure you've heard of it, or you've tuned into the news. When I was down here, I was at the tail end, or no, the beginning of the drug war was the tail end of my experience here, and that's why I left the first time around, because things did get really dangerous. And at the point where coolers of severed heads were being dropped off in good neighborhoods, and you're like, okay, yeah, the society is literally breaking down, and I don't want to be a part of it. Which is a big reason I left the U.S. because every time I go to the U.S., I see society just slowly decay more and more, and I don't really want to be a player on a losing team. That's not a way I choose to live my life, since I only have one of these things. So safety wise, listen, if you come in trying to talk like ghetto ass Spanish, or you're like really into that stuff and you're looking for it, you're going to find it, and they will find you. If you select unsafe areas to live in and you think the gangster stuff is cool, yeah, that might fly in the US. Really, even normal people in the US think you're an idiot. In Mexico, they're actually quite conservative down here. So like attitudes towards drugs or prostitution, yeah, you can find them really easily if you want to, but the general attitude is that they just kind of look the other way and you stay over there, and they see those people as less than. No one really thinks that stuff's cool, but it is necessary because there's a demand for it. So in terms of safety, really just watch your P's and Q's. Don't go seeking it out. If you hang out with stupid people in bad places, then bad things are going to happen to you. That's anywhere in the world, not just Mexico. And yeah, just don't hang out with losers in general. When it comes to crime statistics, most major cities in Mexico, they're comparable to US major cities. I believe I need to find a study, and I'll do a video much more specifically on this topic. Uh, but when I was looking at Mexico City, I believe I compared it to like 2018 stats for Seattle. It was about the same in terms of like violent crime rate. However, Mexico City is actually far more safer now because well, U.S. has a crime spree. I mean, it's we've seen it in generations in the past United States, but because of political issues and because of general cultural attitudes that make no sense at all. Again, stuff that I just stepped away from because I don't want to be a part of it. But it is there. I go back to the U.S. I have family there. I love my family. I walk into this and you see this crime rate skyrocketing in areas where it was never really an issue before. So I'd say in general, again, I need to do more research for a more specific video specifically on this topic of safety. But when I was looking and finally pulled the trigger on moving to Mexico City, it was about comparable as I believe it was 2018 Seattle crime stats. Obviously, it's gotten a lot higher in the U.S. because they're like defunding police and just nonsense like that. And a big thing to me too, because even when I was in Guadalajara, and when things started getting really bad there during the drug war, one thing I really leaned on was that they have stronger community relationships here. So most people, you know your neighbors. They have security, quite a bit of security in the building I live in. So you know all the security guards. I know the manager. I know the owner of the place I live in. I text her. So you have these social bonds, these social relationships. I think a lot of people underestimate in other cultures, especially in the U.S. We're more individualistic, but being able to lean on your social safety net, not in the terms of socialism. Social safety net is in you're a good person, you provide value to other people's lives, and in turn, they provide value to your life. And then you have a community of these people, actual healthy social relationships, then the safety thing really becomes a non issue. Again, even when it got really bad in Guadalajara, uh, people, even the street people, when I'd walk to the gym, people you see day by day, they might look like non-player characters or just kind of background avatars, but they'll come up to you and be like, "Hey, man, like stay home today," or not a good time to be going to the gym. Like go on your roof and play dominoes and drink Cuomas or 40s instead, and then sure enough, something would happen. Again, this was in like the height of when it was really, really unsafe down here, and I got the hell out of here. Watching like military operations against, parties in the drug war and whatnot from my roof. I'm just like, yeah, this looks like a movie, and a movie that it's entertaining, but I don't want it to be my day to day life. Fortunately, that has changed in a lot of areas. I was recently in Tijuana a few weeks ago, and they did have a retaliatory organized violent crime there. But it was they put out an announcement. I think it was Friday night. Hey, people in Tijuana, stay home for the weekend. They had some strategic attacks on government agencies, and then by Monday it was all cleaned up. So it still happens. However, we don't have entire groups or political parties of people burning down entire cities and then being told that it's a peaceful protest. That doesn't quite happen here. All right. That being said, location, a big thing, and actually, what stemmed this topic for today was one of my good friends here. She sent me a text. It was a TikTok video that's trending here in Mexico, saying like, "Hey, Mexico, prepare! More gringos are coming down because the U.S. is going to have a civil war." And she asked me, she's like, "Jaron, is this true?" I was like, "Well, that thought's gone through my head." On the website I started creating content on before I started putting my real name and face out there and whatnot, I wrote about that extensively, that the U.S. is heading in that direction. I don't believe it'll be like a major one like the last U.S. Civil War, but I think it'll look like the Mexican drug war. There will be regionalized warfare over turf. There will be regionalized armed conflicts at some point. Hopefully not. Knock on wood. I'm from the U.S. I love the U.S. My family's all in the U.S. I really hope that doesn't happen. But that was a big thing I took into consideration before moving down here. I saw things moving in that direction, and again, it's not something I want to be a part of. Another question is in terms of listen, the current administration we have in the U.S. they're warmongers. We knew this in the second debate. The dude who's in the office now literally looked in the camera and said, "If you vote for me, you're in for a long, dark winter." Like, all right, done. That's all I need to know. He made it very clear things are going to suck. And again, I'm not one to live my life playing for a losing team, so I decided to get the hell out of there. But obviously, they're pushing the narrative that they want to lead us to a global conflict. Why? Because it makes money. I started my career in the defense industry, so yeah, there's a lot of money there. So Mexico's a safe choice because, well, Here's a couple of things. It's a safe choice technically because they have a neutral foreign policy. Their military doesn't have any offensive type capability, at least that they publicize. I have a friend who's in the military. We're gonna hang out tomorrow, so I'll go ahead and ask him if that's true or not, and then this is a topic I can cover in the future. But in general, they're more there for social security in terms of like managing safety of their own society. They have defensive capabilities, and they do a lot of international humanitarian work. In fact, they publish it a lot down here, and obviously the narratives of the mainstream media changes between countries. But down here, they're actually quite proud of the fact that even in the U.S., when they have like hurricanes or natural disasters, they usually send the Mexican military to assist in international aid. It's weird saying foreign aid to the U.S., but I'm technically a foreigner, so they send foreign aid to my home country. Another thing is this is the big thing for me moving here that it is close to the US and the US is very accessible. So in Mexico City, what I do usually, I fly to Tijuana. It's like $50 flight each way. It's been a little more expensive lately because the whole fuel issue. So I actually booked a ticket last night. It was $100 each way. Flying to Tijuana, you walk across a pedestrian land bridge that they built in 2015, and then you're in California. And then from there, you can continue your connection. I usually just get whatever I need done in San Diego. Like if I need to go to the U.S. to sign legal documents or do any kind of banking type stuff or any business that requires that we meet in person. Well, most people in the U.S. are cool with going to San Diego. If not, I have to go to New York on occasion, Los Angeles, Miami. Then anywhere I need to go, it's a direct flight away from Mexico City, and it's pretty cheap. And in terms of if you want to stay within the country of Mexico, again, it's a very, very diverse country. Everything you really need, you have here. And their public transportation is not only well connected, but it's also very efficient. Kind of the joke here is that nothing starts on time except for the buses and soccer games. That seems to be the case. But very well connected, very accessible. Even if you want to get a private driver, there's been times where I'm like, well, I don't really want to take a bus, but I'll do a private driver. For my move for the apartment, I collect like old vintage stereos and stuff. So I found some gear that were in like really weird or sketch places. You find people you trust, obviously, but I just give someone the cash needed. Like, hey, go there. Let's FaceTime when you get there. Test out the equipment. I'll walk you through everything, and then go ahead and pay for it and bring it right back here. And it's like $20, so everything is definitely convenient in that sense. Food. I almost contemplated not making this on the list because it's so obvious. Like food in Mexico is fantastic. Like it's known worldwide for having very good food, and a lot of people don't realize this also. But it's not just Mexican food. In Mexico City, they have five-star restaurants, world-renowned chefs that come here. And a little fun fact, guys, if you're in Southern California, Tijuana has a very good culinary scene. If you go to Zona Rio, it's couple hours away from where you're at. If you're in Southern California, if you're in San Diego, it's a couple minutes, depending upon the traffic spikes, and you're down there. You have your hands on some of the world's best cuisine, which a lot of people don't realize. Obviously, everyone here they cook and they cook pretty well too. It's not the culture like the U.S. where people are proud, like when you date a girl in the U.S. For you guys out there. And they're like, oh, yeah, no, I don't cook, or I'm a foodie, but you don't cook. That doesn't really happen in Mexico. People are proud to show off their culinary skills. I take care of my health, so I cook most of my own meals. I actually cook really well, too. So it's really fun when you get people over and you're just all just whipping up really good stuff in the kitchen. And a big thing here too, those who have followed my channel for a bit, high quality protein is widely available and affordable. I make that note because I spent most of last year in El Salvador, and the food quality is not as good. It's all imported from the U.S. It is all imported from the U.S. And I realize that, remember like when you're kids and you're going to the grocery store and you see the expiration date on stuff and you're like, I wonder what they do with this. Do they just throw it out? What a waste. Well, no, they ship it to countries that import it, like Central American countries, and there it's a delicacy, so it's very high price. So when I was actually calculating what I needed just for my basic protein requirements, it ended up being like $40 a day if I went and had to procure all that stuff. So I depended a lot on protein powders. Here in Mexico, it's the other way. I get a kilo of tinga, which is like a really nice spicy stewed chicken, and it's just the pulled meat. A kilo of it's 2.2 pounds for those U.S. people listening. And after conversion, it comes out to about $10. So I can stretch that into 2 days or so, and I eat very well for very cheap. Um, let's head on to the next one. All right, so my audience is predominantly men. Like I said, I'm pivoting this channel a bit, but I still will touch a lot on the dating topics because that's something I've gotten down in my life. And by down, everyone has a different definition of what that looks like. So a lot of people say, "Oh, you don't know anything about dating." And I was like, "Well, I get the results I want." So it depends on what you're looking for, but that's an area that I've definitely taken into consideration in my life. It's always been important to me, my interpersonal relationships, whether that's friends, family, professional, or romantic relationships. Really, guys, when you have really good relationships and you live in places where people are just fun and free and happy and just a pleasure to be around, it really just it changes your entire world. So that extends to women as well. Guys that have been to Mexico, the women here are something else. They're attractive, fit, fun, feminine, and a note on that is that Mexico is very, very diverse regionally. So the looks or the features might change. They're usually more European type. If you go north, they're more indigenous looking. If you go to the south, if you go to the East Coast, there's actually communities where you get like mulatto or like African descendants in some small areas. And then most of Mexico, it's a mix of all of them. But there's certain regions where you'll see, like when I lived in Guadalajara, the school I went to, people are like, "Oh, well, what was it like? You don't look like anyone there." I was like, "No, I looked like everyone there. Like they're European looking. I'm mostly European." And I'd go to northern states of Mexico, like Aguascalientes, Durango, Chihuahua, Sonora, and people that there were blonder people than me at times. Whereas if I go to places like Chiapas or Oaxaca, it's mostly indigenous, and that's where I mentioned earlier when we talked about race. Like people will touch my pointy nose and my hair. They're like, "Oh, whoa, weird," and you're just like, "All right, don't put your hands on my face because I don't know you, and there's no running water here." Um, but that's one of the beautiful things about Mexico. It just has everything. So it depends on what you like, but in general, women just have more positive feminine attitudes. They take care of themselves. They're sweet. They're kind. They're willing to go out of their way to help you out. And when they come over, it blew my mind when I first lived here 15 years ago. Now it blows my mind when I go back to the U.S. that they aren't this way because I've had so much experience here. But when I was a young lad studying in Guadalajara, girls would come over and they'd just like automatically start cleaning, or they'd just start cooking, or they'd start doing dishes, or start like tidying up your stuff or rearranging your house. You're like, "What are you doing? I can do it. Like I'm capable." Um, Now it's just something I'm used to. I had a female guest last night, and when I woke up this morning, it's like, "Oh, dishes are done." I took a shower, came out, the bed was made, and blankets on the couch because it gets pretty cold here at nights when it's storming outside. Blankets on the couch are all folded. I'm like, well, that's really nice. Like that literally shaved like a good enough amount of time off my day to where I can just get started working. And they're very small. In Spanish, they call them like detallista or detalles. They're very small details that really make a world of difference. And the girls down here know what's up. That they know that they can't attract a guy unless they actually act feminine and do these things. Not to say that I'd boot a girl if she doesn't do them, but most of them do it, and it's just in their nature. They don't have to be told. So for guys who've never experienced dating like an actual attractive feminine woman, yeah, Mexican women are something else. And in general, I'm not at this stage yet, but I'll likely get there at some point. They're more traditional compared to other Western nations. So there is a caveat there. Mexico City is much more liberal than the rest of Mexico. However, when I lived in Guadalajara, I had a couple girlfriends in college. I even had one girl. She was never my girlfriend, but she told me at one point, she's like, "Hey, I want something serious with you." She was like, she wanted to be a virgin until marriage, which was still very common down there, out there at that time. And she said, "Oh, but you can date other girls. You can have relations with other girls." I'm translating directly from Spanish, so I say like tener relaciones. So if you have relations with other girls, I'm fine with that. Just don't embarrass me. And that's most guys that are actually on top of their game and like have some experience. You'll notice that that's usually the attitude that most girls take. But again, down here, it's kind of built into them. Yeah, ideally they'd prefer you don't do that, but that they understand that it's going to happen. If you're desirable, then they're gonna step up to the plate and they're going to put in their effort to earn you and keep you. In the U.S., it's kind of inverted. I still do well when I go to the U.S. Like there's also like I know all sorts of cool people no matter where I go. But it's definitely more work for much less reward in the U.S. Let's just say that. All right, and I touched on this already a couple times in presentation. So Mexico is very diverse. It's a huge country. And that being said, it's a very diverse country. I think a lot of people, I know even when I first came down here 15, 16, 17 years ago, I thought that they were all going to be like the people that worked for my family on the farm. For those who've been following me, I grew up on a farm in a small agricultural town. And I thought, okay, well, it's going to be this class of people. And then I went to university. I'm like, oh, these people are better educated than most Americans I know. And they speak perfect English and they come from European backgrounds and they believe in preserving Western society and values and culture and religion. And okay. But then you go to pockets where they've been largely untouched by the Spanish conquista. I remember when I first started learning Spanish, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can communicate with the workers on the farm when I go home. And then I go further south in Mexico. And I'm like, oh, these people don't speak Spanish. They speak their native languages. And there's like one 17-year-old girl who's like the local representative of the Puebla, and you have to talk through her. So definitely interesting. Definitely blow my mind. Like, oh, they don't speak Spanish in all parts of Mexico. So really anything you're looking for, you can find. You'll never run out of experiences, great people to meet, or new things to do here. So that being said, that concludes my presentation. I know there's some technical stuff at the beginning. I don't know why that happened. This never happened to me before on here, but it is what it is. So I can edit it up and post a bit. And now I will go through some of the questions. So are you a soccer fan? They are crazy bad down there. Club America is a big team in Mexico City. Oh, yeah, they talk a lot of shit. And Cruz Azul too. So when I lived in Guadalajara, I went to La Autónoma de Guadalajara. We had our own team. They're called the Tecos at the time. They changed it to Estudiantes during the drug war, and then now I believe it's back to Tecos. Last time I checked in with them, because I've still got good relationships there. And Club Atlas was the big one too. So I was an Atlas fan, I was a Tecos fan, and then Chivas. Chivas was the biggest one. So I liked all the Guadalajara teams. Previously, when I was living in Guadalajara, I'd fly out to Mexico City, watch them on the road. And Americas is kind of like the New York Yankees or the Patriots in the U.S. It's the team that everyone loves to hate, but they're like the biggest team. And then Cruz Azul, a lot of people will talk crap too. So I haven't been to any games lately. Personally, I'm not a soccer fan. I never played it as a kid. I think I tried when I was like 5, and I wasn't that good. And I kind of find the sport boring. But there's a difference between watching on TV and watching it live. And really, it's all about the company you keep. So if there's like a friendly game between the U.S. and Mexico, I'll put on a jersey and I'll go hang out with people, and we'll have some beers and talk shit. It's super fun. Am I entertained by the game? Not really. Like if there were two countries that I didn't care about, or the people around me more specifically wasn't really invested in the game, then yeah, I'd have no reason to watch it. Let's see. Talked about safety in Mexico. Yeah, I did cover that already on a previous slide, but just to catch you up. In general, it's kind of like anywhere. Watch your P's and Q's. If you act like an idiot, if you hang out with idiots, if you go to dangerous places, if you're looking for trouble, guess what? You will find it. There are times when things have historically gotten bad during the drug war. When I was here my last time around, things did get really bad. Innocent people were getting caught in the crossfire. But once the turf war is over, then it's just business as usual. And a lot of that stuff, it's highly ingrained in society. Yes, it's something that most people would prefer it didn't exist, but they understand it does. And the correct attitude to have, because you will run into these people. A lot of people think it's like narcos. No, you'll run into these people in academic institutions. You'll run into them in government organizations. When I was at the Autónoma, someone asked me one time, he's like, hey, do you want to make an investment, like in a shipment? And he like broke it down like a pitch deck, like it's a legit fund or investment. So it's in all areas of society, but in general, if you don't want any problems, just don't invite them into your life. And those people, they run their enterprises. A lot of them even make them on like Forbes top whatever lists. It's a business. Stay out of the way. So I take the attitude, hey man, that's cool, whatever. I'm not judging. You stay in your lane, I stay in my lane. Or, oh, what do you think about this? Like, hey, as long as your business isn't a part of my business, then I have no business in your business. And saying those types of things, I've never had any sort of issues. Even when things got really bad, I never had any issues. Is there any strange racial animosity towards gringos in Mexico? There's becoming more and more. The general attitude. I went to a comedy show a couple of weeks ago, and I think the guy spent 20 minutes just talking shit about gringos, but he was funny. Like the delivery was well, and he wasn't wrong. That's what makes good comedy. It's uncomfortable truths. I'm like, I thought the guy was hilarious. So it doesn't really depend on the Mexican as much. It depends on the type of gringo. So if you're whiny, if you're woke, if you follow an Isterism, they're not going to like you down here because they don't want that shit in their society. They have a beautiful culture. They have amazing art and history and cuisine and culture and customs. Like, don't try to do Latinx stuff in their language. It doesn't even compute in Spanish. So, like, obviously, you have to be a retard to think that's a good idea, or you just have no cultural sensitivity at all. If you come down here and you're thinking, well, why aren't things the way I want them to be? You're not welcome. Like, you will have people that don't like you. Um, a big thing is too, and this we've seen with Mexican migration patterns historically in the U.S. that you need to learn the local language. I remember years ago when I was in college, and people would say, "Oh, well, you shouldn't have to force them to learn English." Like, okay, telling an immigration group that they don't have to learn the local language is setting them up to fail or to not have as high quality of life as they would if they knew the language. So definitely come down here, fit into the culture, participate in it, make friends. They're friendly people. Like, even if you speak zero Spanish, they'll have patience with you, and they'll be happy, and like they'll make fun of you, and they're like, "Oh, Aberdieso," or the indigenous names. Like, there's some crazy names for cities here, like Aberdieso, Tlaquepaque. Like, the TL sounds really hard to make. So again, it's really comparing and contrasting differences, but they're trying to create a shared relationship with you. If you come with the US cultural mindset, like I described earlier, of, oh my God, everyone's out to get me, and well, this person belongs to this group, and I'm in this group, then you're gonna have a bad time, and that's pretty much anywhere you'll go in the world. The U.S., I'd say the strange racial animosity exists more in the U.S. So if you come down here with, well, I'm a person of this background, ergo I expect to be treated differently, then you're going to have a bad time. If you come down here like, well, I'm a gringo and I don't look like other people, but I speak Spanish and I participate in the society, then personally, I've never had any issues. And as I mentioned earlier, my black friends that have come and stayed with me, a couple of them are looking at actually moving here. They're doing their exploratory trips around the country to see what city's best for them. But they always pop by Mexico City, and we spend a few days together. They've never had any real issues either. Said earlier, there's a bit of it, but it's a lot rarer than it was many years ago. Yeah, and again, these are things that I just noticed. It's weird to say as a white guy, but I previously had experienced racism, but I don't walk around the world thinking I'm a victim. And even now, people ask me funny questions all the time, or they make weird comments, but it's not them being malicious. It's just them being curious. Like, hey, people are saying this. What's your perspective? Now, if I had the mindset that the world is a racist place and it's dangerous for me, then I'd probably be offended by that. But if you're not the type of person who gets offended easily, then you're going to be absolutely fine. And again, even if you are that type of person, if you buy into that woke ideology or any of that nonsense that they're pushing down people's throats in the U.S., you'll start to get rid of that stuff pretty quickly. You'll be like, oh no, people aren't mean, they aren't bad. There are bad people that exist in the world. You have to prepare for that, but in general, you'll start to let go of some of your U.S. cultural ways of doing things and thinking, and you'll just live a much more slower paced, peaceful, and happy life. One thing though, I've screwed this up in the corporate world because obviously I'm a digital nomad, so I work remotely. People in the U.S. that are caught in the rat race, they don't really want to hear about your experiences. They do, and like, oh, that's awesome. But then they'll go behind the scenes and they'll complain like, well, it's not fair. Jaren lives in Mexico, so don't do any of that stuff. Don't share how awesome your life is with people that are still suffering. Just let them suffer in silence. Like, the answer is obviously there, but if they choose to live the life they live and be unhappy as a result, then there's not really much you can do to help them. Um, is there a fitness culture down there? Are gyms big? 15 years ago, they weren't so much. They were more kind of sub cultural type groups. Now, however, gym culture is becoming a much bigger thing. So I have a membership at a gym called SmartFit. Not only do they have locations everywhere in Mexico, but in other parts of Latin America. So I was in El Salvador for a couple weeks this last summer, and then I went to Panama for a bit. I might be in Panama here in a couple weeks again to hang out with some buddies. I have my SmartFit membership. I think I pay $20 a month for it after conversion between 38 or between, yeah, it's 380 pesos, 89 pesos, something like that. So it's around $20 or so. But that gets me massage chairs, tanning beds. They have collagen boosts. They take your thumbprints. So you just walk into any SmartFit location, you pop it on the sensor, and then you're good to go. And actually, this is funny to say, a lot of the gyms here are higher quality than US gyms, because in the US gyms, like, fitness is pretty much mainstream, but at least where I lived in California, fitness means that homeless people buy monthly passes, and then they throw band-aids and drug needles in the shower, and then they sleep in the locker room, and the place always smells like shit, and it's always dampy and dingy, and there's always weirdos in there. You don't really get that in Mexico. They're just normal people. Physical fitness, I wouldn't say it's a culture as big in the US because people aren't as unhealthy or out of shape. Actually, people here say, well, the Mexico's technically fatter than the US. Like, but there's a caveat there. As a percentage, there's more Mexicans overweight than Americans, I believe. But the degree to which they're overweight is a lot less. So let's say, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but let's say 1% more Mexicans are overweight than Americans. But pound for pound, they're maybe like 5 to 10 pounds overweight, whereas Americans, like, they're dying. I mean, we saw in this whole pandemic thing. The answer was very obvious. Don't be fat. Don't have diabetes. Obviously, there's a type that you can't avoid, which is unfortunate. But you can prevent diabetes, and you can actually reverse diabetes if you want to. Don't do that, and you likely will have no issues with this whole thing. Nope, shut down the whole society. Shut it down. Like, absolutely mind-boggling, mind-blowing. On that note, they recently dropped the mask mandate in Mexico City. Some places enforced it, some places didn't. Again, laws here are merely suggestions, and it depends on the class you hang out with. So if you hang out with less educated people, they bought the COVID lie. It's reversed in the US. In the US, if you're like so-called educated, then you bought the COVID lie, but people that are, quote, uneducated didn't buy it because they're disinherent in trust in government. Well, Mexicans in general, they inherently distrust the government because government's everywhere. They're corruptible. Everyone knows that. So here is actually kind of the higher class, more educated people of more economic means that realized that the whole COVID thing was just kind of a scam. So that being said, yeah, culture not as big as far as widespread in the US because people like aren't that out of shape. And especially when you live a good, high quality lifestyle, it's really easy to stay healthy because you don't have to eat out of boredom. You don't have to eat from like the food addiction mindset because you have nothing else going in your life. Half the time I forget to eat and it's like 10, 11 o'clock. I'm like, oh, I got to shovel some stuff down real quick and at least hit my protein target for the day. How is the safety compared to Colombia? For me personally, I use the feel statements like this. So when I was in El Salvador, right before the new president Bukele took power, it was pretty dangerous. My first initial impression is to listen to the locals. The locals told me in El Salvador, like, hey, man, if you get a taxi, you might want an armed guard. Or, hey, stay in this part of town. Don't ever go to this neighborhood. Don't ever go there. Obviously, as they're implementing more of their populist policies in El Salvador, it's actually kind of what everyone's looking up towards in Latin America. Like, yes, here's an example of how to govern a Latin American country. I think Mexico will head in that direction. They have a socialist president now. Most South American countries, they tried their hand at socialism in 2008, kind of like as the Barack Obama effect. Obviously, those economies all failed, and now they're all paying the consequences. Venezuela is the big example. Like, you don't want to go there. Colombia, they have political riots and manifestations all the time. The last time I was in Medellin, taxi drove through a place where a riot came in, got tear gas. We kept the windows up, but I was still kind of all congested. And I remember it was a red eye flight and I went right to work back in San Diego. My eyes were all bloodshot and stuff. Like, I swear to God, it's tear gas. So it depends on what you define as safety. If you live in a nice neighborhood, so when I go to Medellin, I stay in Poblado, which is the equivalent to Polanco, which is where I'm at in Mexico. It's you won't really notice a difference than most as compared to most of your first world cities. And also you won't see, if you go to a nice part of town, they're actually more developed and actually safer than most nice parts of most US cities, since we don't really seem to care about crime too much anymore. As far as stories I've heard of more people running into issues in Colombia. I've heard it is getting worse. But also I go into expat forums and I see people here saying, oh, I got express kidnapped, or, oh, I got robbed. Well, what were you doing? Oh, it was 3 a.m. and I was drunk and I was in a bad neighborhood. And it's the type of person who's not physically fit or doesn't have a presence to where they made themselves a target, really. Not saying that it can't happen to anyone. I got held up at knife point one time in Guadalajara. It's because I wasn't watching my P's and Q's. Things were getting dangerous there. When there's major movements, especially during the drug war, when like the head guy gets taken out, it creates a power vacuum. So all of a sudden, street crime, like random crime, just becomes rampant because there's not like a mafioso there to just crack it down and be like, no, this is my turf. You play by my rules. You don't rob random people. So there is an element of that. So I think it really depends on where you go in Colombia and where you go in Mexico. The difference between Polanco, Mexico, where I live now, and Poblado, Medellin, where I stay when I travel there, it feels exactly the same. I can walk around any hour of day and there's not going to be an issue. It's been your experience with crime or cartels. Yeah, I already spoke on that. What about other places to live, like Oaxaca, Puerto Escondido, Playa del Carmen? Why only stay in Ciudad Mex? It's actually a good question. So I don't only stay in Mexico City. The reason I picked Mexico City is because it's a central point. Geographically, it's central on the map. It's well connected. It's an international city, so I'm a direct flight away from anywhere in Mexico, South America, North America, and then most major Asian and European cities. You can get a direct flight. If not, you'll have a stopover in like Seattle, New York, or Vancouver, Canada. So it was really just the connectivity aspect. Mexico City is also the cultural hub of the entire Republic of Mexico. Yes, Mexico is a republic. They have 31 states, what used to be a federal district, which is now just Ciudad de Mexico. But a lot of times when you pick like a drop down list, if you're going to like have orders sent to your house or something, if you buy stuff on Amazon, they'll still include like Ciudad de Mexico, like it's its own standalone state. So depends. I still call it DFA every now and then, but technically it hasn't been DFA for a while. But the main thing is it's a major cultural, economic, and linguistic hub in the Spanish-speaking world and in the Americas. And if you look at a globe, like not flattened but an actual globe, it literally is the center point for the Western Hemisphere. So I also like all the museums, all the restaurants, having more access to really just diversity. But if I want to go to Acapulco for a weekend, it's a $20 flight. If I want to go to Guadalajara for a weekend, it's like $35, $40 flight. If I want to go to Tijuana, it's usually $50. I spent $100 each way for the tickets I booked last night. So that's the main reason, because Mexico City is a center point. Also, a lot of people come through here since it is the major. It's not like the U.S. where we have like Los Angeles and New York and DC and Miami and Silicon Valley. Yes, Mexico has large cities that are very, very important internationally, but Mexico City is like the cosmopolitan city in the country. So a lot of people come through here too, which for the state I'm at in my life, focusing on my profession, focusing on building up my finances, then it's very convenient for me, because a lot of my good friends come down here multiple times a year just for business. It's not even necessarily pleasure. So it's very convenient for me. However, yeah, I think I probably won't stay in Mexico City forever. I do like Guadalajara a lot. If I do want to start a family, I'll probably go back there and tap into some of my existing networks, because I went to a very conservative university there and did very well. And I reflect well upon the degree of education they gave me. Thank you guys. But likely I'd probably go back to somewhere like Guadalajara. I'm 25 and thinking to move out in the next 5 years. Your research made Mexico my bucket list. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel, and then I'll sign off here in a minute. But reach out to me directly, because let me know what kind of questions you have, and that'll kind of help me come up with new content ideas, because this is all stuff I've gone through. Since I knocked Mexico out, I moved down here when I was like 18, stayed here until I was 23, and then traveled back and forth for years. I lived in San Diego for years, crossed frequently. So I'd say in total, I probably have 6 or 7 years contact time with Mexico, counting other Latin American countries where I've had 3, 6, 9 month stints in, probably like 8 years contact with the language and the culture and whatnot. So I can definitely point in the right direction. I was at the gym today, and like even just doing basic things like knowing how things work, or which ATMs to use, which banks to use, and which ones to avoid, things like that, like the little micro decisions you make on your day-to-day life. It occurred to me just like, oh yeah, a lot of people probably don't know this. So I probably need to start taking notes as I'm going about just living, because I live a very good life here. Should probably just go about taking notes, because these were things I didn't know before. But yeah, definitely consider Mexico. Do you have to get a temporary resident permit to live there, or just a 180 visa run? So when I was a student, I tried to get a student visa. The process was drawn out. Other students didn't have much luck. You'd go to like multiple immigration appointments. Nothing ever happened. So I did the visa runs when I was a student. I went to the US enough to where it didn't really matter. Even now, technically, they really don't care. They started cracking down a bit in Mexico City. So if you flew in on an international flight to Mexico City, there were a lot of foreigners in the forum saying, hey, what the hell? They only gave me 7 days. They should give me 180 days. 180 days is the maximum. It's up to the discretion of the immigration officer, which is the same when you cross any international border anywhere in the world. It is up to the discretion of the officer. So dress nice, present yourself well. Don't get off the plane drunk or high or things like that, or disheveled. Like they say, for example, if you finance a car here, they don't look like just your credit history. They have a persona fiscal, which is like, okay, what's your fiscal responsibility? And then persona moral, like, are you a good person? Are you a moral person? So when people, when I make comments, like they say, oh, Jaron, you have a good profile. It's because I'm both. I'm fiscally responsible and I'm a moral person. I don't commit crime. I don't deface statues. I don't throw soup cans at museum exhibits, like just nonsense like that. So that being said, you'll be fine at first on 180-day visa runs. But when it comes time, like for me, really, I was going to keep doing that, or I was looking at even maybe a different country. But I'd already kind of settled in Mexico City. When it came time to rent a place and sign the contract, then they required that you had permanent or not permanent residency. I have temporary residency for now. So I flipped to San Diego. I'll do a video on how to get that because it was a nightmare to try to get an appointment. But once you figure out how the system works, how to call, what to say, when to call. I'll do a video on that in the future and tell you exactly how to do that because I had to figure it out just recently here. Do you fatigue easier in Mexico City working out because of the altitude? Yes. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Yes. I gas out 1 to 2 reps short of what I normally would in the US. Another thing too, people here smoke a lot. So I'm a social smoker. Like if someone came over right now, if my neighbor knocked on the door, like, which again, this doesn't happen because it's a different culture. Like you don't get people like, oh man, I'm so stressed out. Like, oh, I had a crap day at work. Hey, let's have a drink and a cigarette. Like, all right, cool. They don't dwell on it. Like they just understand life happens to you sometimes. But like if friends come over and they crack a beer and these windows here, they all open wide up. So like, yeah, we'll stand around and smoke every now and then. But when I'm by myself, I don't smoke. But when you do smoke, yeah, usually I gas out like 3 to 4 reps short of where I should be. But you do start to acclimate after a while. I'm at the point now where my gym workouts feel pretty normal. But when I go back to, I travel to San Diego, California a lot. When I travel back to San Diego and I'm back at sea level, it's kind of like, whoa, like you get more higher density of oxygen. You can kind of feel that clarity. How long does it take to get a citizenship in Mexico, or can you live as a permanent resident like the U.S.? You know what? I have to look that up real quick because I'm not at that phase yet. For temporary residency, okay, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, so to get legal residency in Mexico for at least 5 years, kind of okay. So yeah, for Mexican citizenship, it's 5 years. For temporary residency, that's the first phase in the process. I believe it's 2 or 3 years. Let me take a look at that. Temporary Mexico residency. Da, 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 da. I don't want to bore you guys too much. Mexico's temporary residency permits last for between 1 and 4 years. I believe when you first get it, it's for a year, and then it's like 2 or 3 more years after that. And then at some point, if you want, and again, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to convert it to permanent residency, you can, and then you qualify for citizenship. If you're asking about like multiple passports and stuff, when it comes to that question, I've got good relationships down in El Salvador, so I'd probably go down there and do like an investor class visa. And again, their government aligns more with kind of the way the world's moving, but the world doesn't realize it yet. We're still the leftist cultural Marxist pendulum. It's swung so far to the left, and they're really pushing. But I think it's going to start swinging back. If not in the U.S., heaven forbid, in Latin America, it's already there. You're seeing populist, more right-wing, conservative, traditional regimes popping up overnight, and El Salvador is kind of the model for that. So you'll see more investor class type visas, and the Spanish-speaking world kind of understands that the U.S. is like not a place you want to be right now. So they're getting ready. They're expecting to take our dollars down here. Share some story of Cancun City. I'll do that in another video. I've only ever been to Cancun for spring break, so I can't really comment on living there, but I think I have shared it before, and I think I know which one you're referring to. Send me a DM and remind me, and I'll do a standalone video on that. What's a good monthly budget to live in Ciudad de Mexico comfortably, say in Polanco or Condesa? So yeah, these are higher rent type neighborhoods. I'm paying 22,000 pesos a month with a conversion rate that's between, I say 1,000 because it's an easy number in my head. When I leased the place, it was 22 to 1. I don't even check the conversion rate anymore. I just assume 20 to 1. And then usually when I check my bank account balance in dollars, 20 to 1 is really easy. You just drop the 0, divide it by 2. So if it's 200 pesos, just say it's $10. But it fluctuates. So that $10 could be like $9.79, or it could be like $11.21 when you look at your bank statement. So 22,000 pesos is what I pay. My internet's 500 pesos a month. That's for 500 megabytes down, although I usually get a lot more than that. Sometimes like I can't see too well. I need to get a better camera. It's going to storm here very soon. You can see the static in the air, and kind of like if you've lived in like tornado areas before, you'll see like the bottom start to fall out of the clouds. And you can feel the static in the air. I'm pretty high up, so I get pretty good lightning shows. So when the lightning occurs, the internet comes out. Gas, electricity, AC is bigger if you're on the coast, so that'll get your electricity expenses up. But like it's a couple bucks a month. I mean, it's in the single digits. It's so little that I don't even pay attention. I just pay it without thinking about it. So Um, Good monthly budget. My monthly budget is $2,000. So let's say that is, oh God, 40,000 pesos. Yeah, that's a lot of money when I go the other way. So most of that's rent, which comparably, when I lived in California, I remember paying my rent and justifying to myself, like, oh, well, 50% of my income in rent, that's not too bad. Well, since coming down here and being more relaxed and not being stressed out all the time and having nice weather and having good relationships and just a good quality life, I've actually upped my income considerably compared to when I lived in California. And I already lived pretty well in California. So my rent, depending upon the month, because I kind of work when I want to now, or whatever opportunities are up, or whatever I decide to do, my rent ends up being like 10 to 20% of my total income. Like I said, the main rule is you want to earn in dollars, pay in pesos. So $2,000 a month is a very, very comfortable budget. Again, that is for me living in a nice neighborhood, going out at least once a week to drinks or dinner and drinks, and at least one trip a month too. However, that budget does go up when I travel to the US, or I've been traveling a lot these last few months. So that budget will get up more around US budget. But going back to the previous question someone asked too, as far as why I chose Mexico City, Mexico City is my home base. So I did an analysis of the way I spend my time and where I spend my time. I spend most of my time working, doing creative stuff, reading, writing, playing guitar, doing my corporate gigs, or trying to, work on my channel. So at least 80% of my time is spent doing that. I was like, okay, well, I don't have to be in high rent California and like high stress California. I'll just come here. It'll be my home base. But when my buddy's like, hey, man, we're having this really cool party in San Diego, I'd love for you to be there. I'm there. It's $50. I'm there. I just have to, it's a 3-hour flight and I walk across a bridge. It takes literally 8 minutes to get from one border to the other if you use the CBX crossing at Otay Mesa in San Diego, and I'm there. So I took a lot of those into consideration too with my life. So if we're just talking like this last month, I'll have a better representation. I'll do a video on the budget topic too. I'll break it down. But this last month, it usually ends up being about $2,000. This month, I'll actually come under. Some of my corporate work dried up temporarily. So I think this month, I'm aiming that I'll probably come in around 1,400, 1,500. Like I said, 1,000 of that being rent. My meals are all delivered. That's $200 a month for Monday through Friday, through all 3 meals. And then whatever's left, $300, that's going out. I mentioned earlier going out to a steak dinner for 3 people. Each of you get 1 drink. Each of you get like an empanada and then a shared dessert. That ended up coming out to $50 for me. Not the nicest restaurant, because they have 5-star restaurants here. You can drop $300 for a cut of steak if you go to the right place. But just your average upper middle class restaurant, that's about what it comes out to. Why do you think the country like Mexico has bad reputation and countries like USA and woke? Um, it's different between the USA and Europe. I think for Europe, probably it's because of the cultural artifacts that are produced largely in the US. So Europe's only perception of Mexico is what they see on TV. It's Netflix, like Narcos, and when something makes the news from Mexico, it's usually something bad, like, oh, there was a shooting, or um, there's some sort of like drug related whatever. So that's the only real contact, I think, especially in Europe, that you get in terms of how things are like in Mexico. In the US, it's a bit different because of the proximity. So Mexico and the US, it has a very, very closely shared history, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Now, the way they even have an expression down here that if the what is it? That if the U.S. coughs, Mexico sneezes. So there is a large dependency there, but also it goes both ways. A lot of people don't understand that. One of my military friends asked me the other day, is like, hey, why doesn't Mexico just invade the U.S.? I'm like, oh, well, there's a good reason for that. Mexico is it's a buffer zone for the U.S., and we have invaded Mexico multiple times. We have conquered it. Usually takes a couple of days for us to do it. And the main thing is that the U.S. didn't want to inherit Mexico's problems. So there's hundreds of years of history there, which I think kind of shapes some of the viewpoints from a cultural standpoint in the United States. But there's also like recent migration from like the 1950s onward. Even Eisenhower like had a big deportation plan. He called it Operation Wetback back in the 50s. In 1986, Reagan had an amnesty. So you get that at any point in the U.S. when there's new immigrant communities. The Irish were heavily discriminated against. The Germans were heavily discriminated against. The Italians were heavily discriminated against. Jewish, whatever. So Mexico is just the latest wave. Now it's not even really Mexicans anymore from Latin migration, because Mexico's actually, it's a better place to live than the U.S. now, and a lot of Mexicans are understanding that, and they're coming back here. Or if they're second, third generation, they're trying to come back and re-explore their roots, and like, oh yeah, like I'd much rather be here. You get like a lot of countries that are really, really poor compared to Mexico. So Mexico is actually now economic powerhouse in Latin America. If you remove the U.S. from the equation, then Brazil and Mexico would be the major economies on this hemisphere. And by 2030, I believe, is the estimate that Mexico will be in the world's top 10 economies. So they're definitely on the up and up. The U.S. is coming down. A lot of people don't realize that. So I think they're just holdover attitudes from recent migration patterns over the last 3 or 4 generations, and it depends on where you're from too, man. If you go to LA and like you get into like that cholo culture, then you'll be like you might not like Mexicans as much. Or you'd be like, okay, well, you claim to be Mexican, but you're born and raised in the US and you don't speak any Spanish and you're a criminal. Then they extend that logic like, oh, all Mexicans must be that way. And I'll be honest, I had my cultural biases too when I first came down here. And then I went to a university. I'm like, oh my God, like I'm receiving a higher quality education than I ever would in the US. And I stayed down here. I did most of my education here because I always say when I was growing up, I was a smart kid in a stupid school. When you come down here, like, oh my God, I'm with other smart people. And like, they don't hate their culture and they understand the Second Amendment because they're academic people and they understand I swear to God, I think Mexicans appreciate U.S. culture more than Americans do. Is at least that's been in my experience. Do you speak Spanish by birth or did you learn yourself by getting around Spanish people? I grew up on a farm. Most of our help was hired help. In the early 90s, it was mostly Russians and Bosnians. Later 90s, when we had the conflict in Bosnia, we had more Bosnians, but they're your migrant worker class, to be honest. So about the time the U.S. signed NAFTA, I believe it was January of '94. Well, that kicked off a economic crisis in Mexico, and they had some political stuff going on here too that was not so fun for people that were around in that time. So that's what really kicked off like this mass illegal immigration wave. And then what happened was both political parties are at fault of this, by the way. The Republicans now have taken the position that like, hey, we need to get this under control because having an open border is not good for national sovereignty. But the left has really doubled down on it. And really the reason they like illegal immigration, which again causes a lot of these attitudes, because when you have a mass influx of immigration, people that don't look like you, they don't think like you, they don't talk like you, they don't understand how to do basic stuff like you call someone and they don't speak your language. Yeah, that's frustrating. And when you start to compound that, then people generally develop those attitudes. Back to the gringo discrimination question here, they're starting to get more and more of those attitudes as far as like, oh, there's too many damn gringos here. And I always say, yeah, there's too many of them. They need to get out of here. But I always make the distinction. I'm a classical American. And Mexicans kind of understand what that means. Like America traditionally has been held in high esteem. Now in the international community, not so much. That's since the Obama days. Well, actually, you know what? Bush did it too. The illegal wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, people weren't too happy about that. Obama coming and being the representative of our country and like, I'm the president of America, but I hate my culture and I hate my upbringing. Like most foreigners are like, okay, what the hell's wrong with this guy? Trump was a polarizing character, a lot of them because of the immigration issue. They didn't like Trump, but you'll find a lot of Trump supporters in Mexico because they're moving politically in that direction as far as more populist. Trump's not even really right wing. He's just a populist. He just executes the will of the people. He wants to be liked and held in high esteem. But the cultural Marxists have gone so far in the U.S. now that the people in Mexico are like, hey, we don't want that shit down here. Like they have their like Biden is blatantly bad. Like he is intentionally doing things to screw up the country. Whereas their socialist president here, he's just kind of a puppet. Like he's just kind of non-effective, and that's kind of the attitude people have. But going back to Spanish by birth, so I grew up on a farm. We started getting Mexican migrants late '90s or so once the Bosnia stuff settled out. Had some in the mid '90s, more into the 2000s, and it got to the point where I was like, okay, well, if I want to communicate with these people, living in an agricultural area too, it also got to the point like I couldn't get a job, like a high school job flipping burgers, or I couldn't work the cash register because I didn't speak Spanish. And academic, so I did the research and realized that okay, well by 2030 the U.S. is going to be a major Spanish-speaking country, and we even accelerated that curve. The U.S. is the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, behind Mexico. There's more people that speak Spanish in the United States than speak Spanish in Spain. So I realized it was necessary being around those people. I took like Spanish in high school, but you get people that say that stuff all the time. And then they come down here and like, oh, donde está el baño? Or it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. So I kind of half-assed it when I was studying it in high school. just being around it all the time. And then when I came down here, it was literally a couple of weeks where I made it a focus. Like, I'm going to learn the language. It was a couple of weeks to where it all just kind of made sense to me because I also cut out English. So you constantly hear it, and all of a sudden it just kind of clicks in your brain. Even now, I'll still make errors. Like, people can tell I'm not from here, but they assume I'm from a different Spanish speaking country, or I'm just like one of those. When you meet other foreigners in Mexico, like, you'll come across Europeans, like they grew up on the French and Spanish border, and then their mom's from this region, their dad's from this region. They speak all these crazy languages. People can tell they're foreigner, but they don't really know quite where they're from. I kind of get put in that class. You're really beating the quote, which is USA, American Land of Opportunities, but really information on podcast. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. So that's the goal here, guys. I know on this channel historically, and I'll still make this a big focus. I'm thinking that I'll probably do a weekly game room type topic, maybe Wednesday or Thursday nights or so. Open forum to like just talk game in general. But a lot of guys that run in my inner circle, they've chosen other countries to live in, or they're in the process of going to other countries, but they do well in that area of their life, wherever they're currently living. And I've noticed in these spaces that I hang out with, in these intellectual or online or digital spaces, that a lot of people were kind of saying the same thing, that obviously you need to get off the sinking ship while you still can. Not to say that Mexico is going to emerge in the U.S. as a place to be an economic powerhouse, but the U.S. will just end up being not as relevant on the global stage as it once was before. And they've written a lot of bad checks with a lot of other countries in the past. And like I said, I don't want to really be a part of that struggle for global power. I'll just come to Mexico. We're like, hey, no, we know our place. We're down here. We're chilling. We're just life as usual, and all is good. Thoughts on Mexico versus El Salvador? They very similar in attitudes, women, culture. In the sense that they have a shared language, yes, although the Spanish is quite a bit different between them. The educated class in El Salvador uses vos, which I really like. I love it. But vos tenés. Like, I really like that. The way they speak sounds different to the ear. Yeah, in El Salvador, they don't have as much spicy food, for example. And these are just very, very basic things. But if you spend time between the two countries, and even in Mexico itself, it's very, very diverse. There's different cultural attitudes in every city. There's different ways of thinking. There's different racial demographics, national demographics. For example, you go to Panama, it's largely African. It's Afro-Caribbean. I think most Panamanians are more, they don't even look brown like Mexicans. They're more on the black side. But then you have like 10% of Panamanians that are like pure Europeans. They look like me, or even blonder than I am. So again, it really depends on where you go. But yeah, I think a lot of people make the confusion. They're like, oh, okay, south of the U.S., it's just the dim brown people down there that speak Spanish. That's not the case. The Latin America as a whole is very, very diverse and very different, even within the same countries. One last question. Tell us something about family laws. Is it kind of like similar in the West, or a little better? You know what? I'm going to make that a topic for a podcast. One of my good buddies, he's in the top 10% group. I'm going to meet up with him and a couple other guys this weekend. He's actually a lawyer here, so I will let him comment on that. I can only share anecdotal evidence or stories that I've heard from people, but in general, the people I know here that are divorced, it's not like the U.S. courts where it gets drawn out and then both parties end up hating each other and the kids end up becoming losers because this was my story too. Like in my family, like I'd ask mom, hey mom, what's the deal with dad? Oh, your dad's a loser. Dad, what's the deal with mom? Oh, your mom's a bitch. Like, okay, well, that's not healthy. That's not a healthy environment. Most people I meet here that are divorced, like, yeah, things just didn't work out, but the father of my child's a good dad, or, oh, the mom of my child is a good mom, we're amicable, we're whatever. But again, that comes back to the fact that they are really big on family relationships here. And I take that same attitude. I think it's weird for me to listen back to things I say in English, because in my head, I'm like, oh, that's a Mexican way of thinking. But I don't want to have loser kids. I don't want to be a part of a loser family, and I won't create a loser family. So obviously, if I were to get married or create a family, it would likely not be in the United States. It would be down here. Go back to my backlog of content on the channel. Some of my earlier videos, I talk about my story as far as like why I started thinking this way. I tried the marriage route in the US, got caught up in that whole system, and just, not going to do it again. So that being said, yeah, this went a little longer than I thought, but I will go back. I'll clip out some of those parts where the audio and video cut out, and get this uploaded. And guys, I want to thank you all for stopping by. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I missed in terms of the top 10 reasons people move to Mexico. Reach out to me directly on Instagram at Jaren Scott. That's JarenScott for my audio only listeners. This is synced to all of your major podcasting platforms, but that's the best way to get in touch with me. Let me know any questions you have because that will help me develop more content as I start pivoting this channel more towards. It'll start off more Mexico focused, so I can get some quick wins there. But really, it'll be more like, how did I get to the point of being a minimalist? How did I get to the point of selling my cars and selling all my stuff and all my worldly possessions and living out of a suitcase for a year? How did I choose what city I chose? So we'll get into a lot of that stuff. And then also day-to-day stuff like how to choose a bank, how to order food, what's the best app, how do you pay your gas, things like that. So let me know any questions you have. I'll start to put together a list of topics to cover, and I'll start doing more Mexico focused content, but I'll still do minimalist type mindset stuff. I'll still do a lot of the dating stuff, and I'll still do a lot of the fitness stuff, but I'm just going to try to branch out there a bit more because I realized that I was doing only dating topics on this channel. I was like, well, it's not really stuff I think about anymore. Like I allocate very little energy to thinking about that stuff because it's something I got down years ago, but stuff I'm going through right now, like how to get temporary residency, like I took notes. There's things I learned along the way. So let me know your questions, guys. I'll definitely share that with you. If you're a man looking to level up in all areas of life by building lives worth living and loving, well, the best place to do that, keep consuming my content, like the video, leave any comments down below, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, and ensure notifications are enabled so they actually get pushed to you on your subscription feed. But if you want to take it a step further and actually talk to guys that live like I do, that are in the process of living like I do, and really hash out some ideas and do some serious work on yourself and level up very quickly, then the top 10% is the place to do it. I collaborate with Rich Cooper, my good friend Moff, and another friend from Los Angeles named Josh, who has like the entire social game down. Rich has the entrepreneur and finance stuff down. Dude is loaded. Moff has kind of the same way as me, but he lives a different way in the sense that he's stepping outside of the corporate culture. He's doing his own thing. He's kicking ass and leveling up on all areas of love and life. So you have a couple different avatars and people that are experts in other areas, whereas others might not be. But the group's growing. We got new members joining daily. It's still fairly new, so get in on the ground level. Obviously, as we hit certain recruitment rates, that price is going to go up because the value is going to be higher. And now just take advantage. It's $9.97 lifetime membership. That gets you access to all four of us. You get discounts, 20% discounts on all of our coaching services and premium products. You get to attend the top 1% webinars, so you will actually have the opportunity to get on calls with guys that are not only millionaires, but 100 millionaires, and even a couple guys that have the big B next to the net worth there. We won't ever reveal who they are because a lot of them want anonymity, but this is the type of guys you want to hang out with. So maybe Mexico's not for you. Maybe you want Japan. Maybe you want Australia. We had a guy who was living in Ukraine. He moved there like 2 weeks before it got invaded. And then now he's in the Philippines. He's an Australian guy. So you get to talk, you'll get access to people that are living really, really radically awesome and unique lives by taking advantage of these. So if you don't have the 4,000 a year to pony up for a richest top 1% group, that's fine. Top 10% is where you want to start. It's $9.97. That's a lifetime membership fee. And if you do decide to upgrade, then we can go ahead and just move that payment forward for you. So that being said, guys, I want to thank you all for stopping by. I'll start doing more of these topics. It's one of the first ones that I've done, but leave me your questions, Instagram at Jaron Scott, and I'll start creating more content around the things that you guys want to hear. And as with everything, I want to thank you all for stopping by. And until next time, I shall bid you all farewell.